we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank you for your time. This is the CREC Compliance webinar. Our topic today, we're going to discuss why cannabis applications fail. So as an introduction, my name is Jared Younker, and I am the Chief Compliance Officer for CREC Compliance. CREC Compliance works directly with property owners and operators. That would also include real estate agents and investors and the like in obtaining the required cannabis land use and municipal state permitting and licensing. Shortly put, we do all things cannabis license related, and that extends into acquisitions as well. Certainly the real estate portion is a major component of what we do, and that's most likely why you received our emails and are on this webinar. For that, I thank you. So let's talk, I guess, from a 30,000 foot elevation here on why do some cannabis applications fail while others succeed. So we've polled our clients as well as our lead base, and it seems as though the overwhelming and prevailing conclusion is that the answer is corruption and bribery. Now, certainly we have seen the lawsuits brought by those who had applied for applications in certain municipalities and didn't see them. And we've seen this happen time and time again. So obviously there is a component of corruption and bribery within the industry insofar as licenses are concerned. But what's not often spoken about is the applicant's vulnerability in the licensing process. And so that's what we're going to dive into a little bit here. I'm going to pop out of the presentation and show you the article that actually made me think it would be a good idea to host this webinar. And that's this MJ Biz Daily article about California City rejecting a MedMen application for cannabis store license. Actually, as you read in, it goes into detail about their Pasadena, California application, and how it was rejected and why it was rejected, in particular because of a material change in ownership and or management in MedMen. Now, most of you, I'm sure, have heard of MedMen. This is a giant within the industry. How is it possible that something so large could have overlooked something so important as a change in ownership on their license application? And we're going to get into that a little bit. First, let's jump back over here into our presentation. Sec here. So what we've outlined are three critical components to what end up affecting the outcome of a application for municipal or state cannabis. And that would come down to ownership change, business instability, and incorrect application information. Now, this is a highlight from that article. We're gonna dig a little deeper and then a little deeper further here so that we can really understand what your clients might be up against, or if I have any applicants on the webinar, what you guys are up against when it comes to applications for license. Now, look at this bottom paragraph. According to the letter, 9 out of 10 MedMen owners listed on the company's original application have since changed. Now, these applications oftentimes can range upwards of 6, 8, 9 months sitting with the municipality before a decision is made as to whether or not a license will be issued. During that time, the change in ownership for one of these applicants could quite literally derail the entire application. Now, how could that be? Well, let's take a look at what the state of California considers the definition of a cannabis license owner. It's a doozy. And for those of you who don't have the screen share capabilities going on right now, I had to greatly reduce the size of the font in order to get this all to fit on one screen. But if I could summarize some of the key points here, An owner would be someone with 20% or more interest in the person or entity applying for a license. An owner would also be somebody who engages in 20% of the profits of the cannabis business. Further, an owner could also be somebody who participates in the direction, control, or management of the person applying for a license, and that would obviously extend to the entity applying for a license as well. Wow. So if you think about this, what a lift it must be to put in an application today and think in 6, 9 months from now, possibly even 12 to 18 months from now, that if there is a change in ownership, maybe a new investor comes along, maybe one of the managers walks away. Perhaps there's an issue with funding and we have to cut some people from the team. Any one of those actions, if not handled properly through the municipality and the state, could end up subjecting the license to being, the application itself to being a non-issue on the license. So let's talk a little more about ownership changes. First and foremost, I have to admit, the bread and butter of the clients that we deal with have already attempted to form their own business entities. We see a lot of LegalZoom come into the office. And certainly not to throw any shade at LegalZoom, but one of the things we've realized in the office is that LegalZoom is not a competitor for us, but rather a complementary business service. And I say that because of how many entity formations we end up having to basically go back and fix as a result of LegalZoom. And so when it comes to ownership changes, certainly the first point that we would want to bring about is that we would advise you and your clients to consult with a professional to structure the transaction correctly, right from the start. A proper corporate structure needs to be considered, especially for the liability and investor purposes. Next point, avoid at all costs making the mistake that MedMen make, which is a change to ownership. And as we've seen in the definition of ownership, that can extend to management while an application is in process with the municipality or the state. And so final, I want to point out that, it's not always such a black or white situation, right? On the municipal level, it is at the discretion of the municipality to decide whether or not, let's say, a change of ownership would be acknowledged while an application was in process. Now, some municipalities will allow this and have a path forward. Other municipalities will not allow this, and they will insist that either the original application be pulled and a new one remitted, or the original application be carried out until it issues a full permit or license, at which case that would be the earliest in which we could change the ownership. Let's talk about business instability. This was the number 2 point that we want to avoid when it comes to the discussion of why applications and licenses are denied and or possibly revoked after issuance. And that second part is very critical here for my transactions that involve a license acquisition. And so for those of you who may or may not be familiar with how that works, typically licenses cannot be transferred themselves. Some municipal licenses can, however, at the state level, typically that is not possible. Instead, what we are talking about is the acquisition of the entity which holds the license. And so based off of that, we're going to kind of cover some of the bigger issues that we see with a lot of the deals in the cannabis industry. The first one obviously being the avoidance of lawsuits. Investor issues, certainly that would be a strong contender for number 1 as well. Again, the timeline it takes to get through the licensing process oftentimes is problematic for investors. And so what we end up with is a high failure rate for projects, in part because of a lack of accurate financial forecasting and budgeting. We've pretty much beat this horse to death, but changes in management We've seen that this is oftentimes in conjunction with frequent employee turnover. Layoffs also would be not only a major part of that, but something that this year in early 2020, the cannabis industry saw quite a bit of. Another indicator for instability of business would be the selling off of business assets. And then I've listed some issues reflecting financial health of the business, which would include all of these, and my most important at the bottom, the failure to be current with tax filings. And again, referring back to these transactions, for those of you interested in the transaction of licensed acquisitions, it is without a doubt a #1 requirement across the board that any entity attempting to sell a part of itself or its securities to another person or entity must be current with their tax filings. And so here we're going to insert a compliance tip. To avoid these issues, the client needs to ensure an effective and proper business structure, as well as sufficient working capital for the permits, licenses, and tenant improvements. And finally, there needs to be a layer of compliance management. Now for the third reason as to why cannabis applications either fail or licenses are revoked. All application information must be managed on an ongoing basis. That extends far beyond just changes to personnel within the organization, but as well, sometimes SOPs have to be updated, which brings us to our second point. In 2020, we saw something really interesting happen. In fact, a kind of a domino effect in the cannabis industry. And it started off with the industry being declared as an essential industry. And so with that came a number of new provisions that were required, where certain states and certain municipalities started to allow cannabis operators to operate underneath similar guidelines to what other essential businesses were being required to operate under. And naturally, that would be a change oftentimes in the way a standard operating procedure might normally work, which then requires the applicant to update their SOP and submit that SOP to the municipality and to the state to ensure that their operations are congruent with the expectations of the city and state. So let's get to our top 4 reasons. Okay, top 4 reasons for applications denial. #1, failure to disclose convictions or full information of the owners, managers, financial interest holders. That can extend to employees as well, as there are certain municipalities that require background checks to be done on all employees of the entity. #2, failure to provide an accurate detail of the premises. I could not possibly gauge the number of clients I started to work with who initially attempted to navigate the municipal or state application process themselves, and they got stuck. And you know, that absolutely happens to the best of us. I'm fortunate that I work with an amazing team, and we have the ability to support each other as well our clients. But one of the things I regularly see when clients get to me by the time they're stuck is that there's a great number of discrepancies in the premises diagrams. And you know, if your operating procedures are going to be based off of the premises diagrams and we don't have accurate premises diagrams, well, then we're setting ourselves up here for quite the disaster. Our third reason for application denial would be the failure to acquire all needed licenses and permits for the location. So this is going to vary by municipality and by state, but certainly you can expect a cultivation license is going to need to get some sort of local and or state permit from a water board, which is going to cover where their water source is and what the runoff or disposal of cultivation water would look like. Similarly for manufacturing, depending on if the cannabis operator is going to be a volatile or a non-volatile manufacturer, there are going to be a difference in the requirements as set forth in the plans designed by the engineer. And so now what we're seeing is that we really need to have a full team here. If we're talking about a bare piece of land that's going to need to be land use entitled, guess what, guys? We're going to need to add another member to our team, probably someone to do an environmental survey. We want to make sure that there's no endangered life forms, whether it's plants or animals, on the property. And similarly, we need to ensure to both the municipality and the state that we're going to be compliant with regards to any environmental impact business might have on the local area. And finally, our failure to comply with state regulations and requirements. This is ongoing, right? We've beat it to death. We know we have to have a compliance team, not only to help us with the application, we need that compliance team to help us out with the onboarding. We need the compliance team to help us with our SOP and ongoing management of it. This is ongoing. And that brings us to our compliance tip number 2. License renewals for cannabis land use and regulatory operations typically required annual renewals, typo there, which is comprised of submitting an updated license application information. We have certified cannabis compliance officers here at CREC Compliance that are dedicated to taking care of the never-ending requirements for maintaining an active license. Now, once you have a license, I kind of alluded to this just a minute ago, there's always this need to stay in compliance to make sure all your permits, licensing, and required documentation is kept up to date. Laws change. Next year in California, the 3 regulating agencies intend to consolidate into one agency. Certainly, we would be wise to expect that this will change process. That will inevitably lead to a need to change and update SOPs for clients. And you know what? Fines for inaccurate SOPs can hurt. Below, we've outlined the 3 layers of what we see are cannabis license vulnerability. Layer 1 would be a fine or a suspension of the license. Sometimes those licenses can be reactivated depending on the severity of the infraction. Number 2, if the infraction is bad enough, there is always the industry ban. This is a real thing that has actually happened to not clients of ours, but clients that had been dealing with people that were not yet licensed in the industry who were working unregulated. And then 3, for that type, there would be the option of criminal prosecution. All things we obviously seek to avoid, and that's why cannabis compliance is such a critical element of the licensing aspect. So let's talk a little bit about CREC compliance and deliverables. At the forefront of a successful cannabis business is the leadership team that understands the importance of regular performance audits to gauge efficiency and vulnerabilities. Now, cannabis compliance can be an albatross to those leaders to keep up with, and that's usually why they contract with a company like CREC Compliance, who has crafted a suite of services to ease that lift. CREC can handle all your compliance needs and those of your clients, starting from the process of incorporating, seeing it all the way to operations and ongoing compliance for the operations. And finally, I want to share a story with everyone. As a compliance officer, we sometimes get this kind of, I guess, bad rap, almost like we're stale, perhaps like an accountant. Not that there's anything wrong with being an accountant, because that is part of my background, but I wanted to share a story that I think you're going to be able to relate with. And if nothing else, I hope you will understand the message in this story and that you'll be able to take it with you. So I have an almost 5-year-old daughter. And recently the grandparents thought as a good early birthday present that they would buy us a Nintendo Wii. And I let my daughter start playing with the Nintendo Wii, the Super Mario Brothers game, and she had a great time. And over the last week, she's continued to pull at me, Daddy, I want you to play Nintendo with me. I want you to play Mario Brothers with me. And you know, I'm busy, but I make time for my daughter. And so I sat down with her a few days ago, and she hands me the remote, and she says, Daddy, here's how you play. It tells me the buttons to make the characters move. And then she says, okay, Daddy, you go first. My friends, it took me all of 3.5 seconds to kill my first guy. I stood there, I held the button down, my Mario character ran, and when I saw him about to collide with the little turtle, I physically jumped in the air and flailed my arms around thinking, this is how I make the character work. That is not how you make the character work, and my daughter laughed, and she laughed hard. And then she proceeded to take her first character. For 25 minutes, I sat and watched as she played one life before she died. And then I got to my second character, and I'm sorry to say that my second character actually, it didn't go much better than the first. And naturally, my daughter's second life, you know, she's now 3-4 levels up and 8,000 points ahead of me. And so I played my final life. And, you know, I got the big mushroom, and it made my character bigger. And you guys are probably thinking, why is he telling us these details about this video game, right? Well, just hang on, stick with me for a minute, right? So I think I'm doing better. I think maybe I have a chance to catch up. I learned how to make the character run, and I went to make this super jump, and I misgauged the distance, and I failed, and my last life was gone. And so my daughter is just cracking up. I'm humiliated. And I start thinking to myself, why? How is this possible? Is my daughter smarter at 5 years old than I am? And you know, that's debatable. Is she faster? No. Is she stronger? No. Is she inherently better at video games? No, I don't believe that. So how is it that she just absolutely annihilated me? And the answer is that she had already played that video game for the last week. She had studied it. She had memorized it. She knew the road ahead. And that gave her the distinct advantage of not only navigating the game, but severely punishing her father and sending him into a bout of mild depression. I didn't take it that hard. But my message here is, folks, just like my daughter knew the road ahead, and that gave her the advantage in the game with her dad, CREC Compliance would like to extend our knowledge of the road ahead when it comes to cannabis licensing, acquisitions, and all-round compliance services offered to the cannabis industry. And we would like to offer that knowledge of the road ahead to you and as well to your clients. So I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to pop up here. I see 2 Q&A, but it's just no sounds and hi. So hopefully you've heard me this whole time. And to Maria, hi. If there are any other questions that I can answer, I'm going to go ahead and keep the webinar going for a few minutes here. Please feel free to type them in the little Ask Me a Question box. You know, in retrospect, I probably should have asked for questions. Oh, look, an update on my daughter. I should have probably asked for the questions prior to telling my story. Okay, a question from Miklos. Hi, Miklos. What do you when a municipality does not know what it's doing? What do I do? Well, I've learned some pretty advanced breathing techniques through meditating. And so my immediate answer would be I breathe. And then I just kind of let my heart rate come down a little bit, because initially it's always scary when you're engaging with a municipality or, you know, I didn't say this out loud, but sometimes maybe even a state regulating agency. And it appears as though maybe they have an alternate approach to the ordinance or regulations to what our approach might be. And so what do we do with that? And the answer is always diplomacy, right? Always diplomacy. We do our best to put ourselves in the shoes of whoever it is we're conversing with, whether that is the state or a local municipality. And so the idea is to ultimately understand where they're coming from. Oftentimes that involves the history and public opinion of the locality. And typically, as we present ourselves as experienced in this industry, our results are typically quite good in that we have found the cities, regardless of department, understand that our efforts here are actually to help them, right? Because the municipalities at the end of the day have this huge opportunity to capitalize on cannabis taxes and revenues, right? And so what we present and how we present it to the municipality is oftentimes a matter of benefit to the municipality. Now, that can have a pretty wide array of approaches. So if there was anything specific you wanted to know about that, please feel free to engage me via email after the webinar. But the long and short of it is we get along quite well with the municipalities. Oftentimes the municipalities are just as confused as our applicants. And I don't mean that in any way to throw shade at the municipalities, but more so just to explain just how complicated this process can be and how many moving parts there are when you're talking about cannabis licensing, given that, you know, the property is going to have some sort of land use entitlement or permitting. Then there's going to most likely be some sort of regulatory permitting at the city or municipality level. And then finally, there's going to be the state license. And everybody has to get along and play nice at some level. We consider ourselves kind of like dance instructors that help everybody get in sync and get successful applications submitted, considered, operating, and then we see success. Any other questions for anyone that's still with us? There we go. Thank you for your time. I hear you and thank you. Wonderful, thank you. I have a licensed CUP property in San Diego for manufacturing and distribution. We're looking to sell this. Okay, wonderful. Kathy, I will certainly pass your info along and we will be in touch with you to discuss this opportunity. What is the percentage of approval? That is a great question. I don't want this to extend too long, so I'm going to make a bold assumption, Anna, that the percentage of approval you're talking about is probably with the city and state license. And we're going to exclude the land use licensing and permitting right now because the approval rate on that ultimately is not in our hands, but more so in the hands of the engineer, architect, the property itself, and the municipality in which the property would be located. So with regards to approval of a state and a municipal cannabis license, our approval rate as a department is probably somewhere around 97%. I think I would be greatly concerned if anybody told you they had a 100% success rate in this industry. And to steal a line from a stolen line, one of my colleagues, Larry Horowitz, has sat in front of a large group of people on more than one occasion where I've witnessed him say, I'm going to quote lines of a Queen song, perhaps you've heard of it, and the lines was, and bad mistakes, I've made a few. Well, folks, I am certainly not out of that consideration. We have all made some mistakes. This is a brand new industry. And, you know, for the first little while there, It was very much like the Wild Wild West. No one quite knew the extent of the requirements that the regulating agencies and cities were going to request, and a lot of them were kind of figuring it out along the way. So we have had the good fortune of clients that believed in us and that allowed us to prove to them what our level of service looks like. And so we've learned along the way. And so now our new clients are able to benefit from that advantage. Can I please have your email? Absolutely, Maria. Jared, Jared, at crec.us. That's crec.us. Any other questions from anyone? These have been great. I enjoy engaging when we have these types of presentations. Okay, looks like no. And oh, maybe we got one more here. All right, another from Miklos. When you desire to stack licenses, how do you approach that issue with cities, municipalities, counties that do not understand that the state will approve multiple licenses on one property if it is designated properly? That is an excellent and very specific question, Miklos, that I am most happy to answer, as I absolutely have experience with this. So to clarify, for those of you who maybe need a little bit of tutorial, what Miklos is referring to in so far as stacking licenses is being able to place more than one state license on a property. Now, to get the answer on that, there's a very specific way we approach it, and it's by the state regs. So what we do is we work directly with an engineer, cannabis-specific engineer, of which we have a few different firms we work with. And what we're doing specifically when we work with them is trying to maximize the layout and design of a property in conjunction with the state requirements that outline the separations of cannabis operations. And let me dig a little deeper on that, right? So if we have one property, and let's say on that property we have one building, that building might be 2 stories. Maybe it's divided into 2 parts, two different suites. Maybe it's not. The idea of stacking a license is the idea of approaching the city and state with evidence that you could put 2 separate operators on one property, but that you can distinguish that one property as having multiple premises, where the state and municipal ordinances will typically require that as the key feature for stacking licenses, that you need to have separate entrance and routes of egress, that there needs to be equal opportunity to access employee break areas and restrooms, these types of things that need to be considered at the design level. And so when we approach the cities and the counties and municipalities on it, what we like to do is approach them with the confidence that the plan we are suggesting to them is already preemptively approved by the state, and we have the ability to show them exactly why. That would be our process in getting the approval by the city, municipality, or county on stacking multiple operators to one property. Excellent, excellent question. Okay, another question from Stephanie. Do you have scientists on staff that can take a rough manufacturing procedure and convert it into a proper master manufacturing or batch record per CDPH requirements? No, Stephanie, we do not have any scientists on staff. I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. Stephanie, maybe if you can email me off-site, we can have that conversation. I am certainly familiar with the CDPH requirements on manufacturing and batch records, so let's talk on the site. We'll sort that out. See another comment from Kathy. Thank you, Kathy. It's nice to be appreciated. Okay, we're let's see. Say email again. Sure. It's jared@crec.us. That's my email address for Stephanie. And let's see. With that, we've run the clock at about 40 minutes. You got it, Stephanie. We've run the clock at about 40 minutes. I know everybody is really busy these days, and this may not even be your only Zoom meeting for the day. Hopefully it was the most entertaining and educational. I want to thank everybody for your time. Obviously, I am here looking to educate as well as gain business. So if there's something that CREC compliance or CREC as a whole can do for you, your application, or your clients, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know how we can make that happen. I want to thank you all again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Take care.